Hello, I'm Dennis Lyons, the editor of the Daily Item, and I'm happy to have Fred Keller, a candidate and incumbent running for the 85th District in the State House. He's one of our ongoing series of interviews with candidates for office in the November 6th election. Thank you for being here, Fred.
Well, I want to thank the Daily Item for having me. I want to thank the people of Union and Snyder counties, too, for the opportunity I've had so far to serve, and I hope to be able to continue that service.
Okay, well, we try to move this along pretty quickly, so let's start out with the story that's on the front page of the Daily Item as we record this today on Thursday, October 18th, and that is the failure to get statute of limitations out of the Senate. Now, I know the House voted for it very robustly.
Yes.
Where do you see that going? Is there any chance they come back after the election and do it? What are you hearing on that?
Well, the first thing is that we've heard is we're on a 12-hour call of the chair. So, we could be back in tomorrow. We could be back in next week. It is unfortunate that we didn't get that done for the victims, the people that suffered that tragedy. I thought the bill that we passed made a lot of sense. It gave a clear window, the two-year window look back, and also going forward, it gave the civil and criminal opened up those windows to make sure that people could make sure they get justice.
Well, obviously you voted for it, and obviously it's clear you supported it. Your opponent, when I asked her that question, indicated she was kind of on the fence a little bit on it because I guess her husband is a public defender, so she has seen it from both sides. Is there any merit to this whole idea of it possibly being unconstitutional, do you think?
Well, when you look at legislation, anybody could challenge a piece of legislation and take it to the court. So, if you want to go on that premise, I mean, you wouldn't do anything.
Right.
So I'm not going to, we can make that question in the House if we think something might be unconstitutional. It's up to the House to decide whether we want to go forward. But once we go forward and it becomes law, until it's challenged, it's the law of the land. So if if it's challenged and the court makes a decision, I guess that'll be the court's decision. We've seen that happen in other cases, not necessarily related to that, but.
Okay. One other thing that I know you were in favor of and that did not happen again is the reduction of the size of the State House.
Yes, I think that was a good bill, and the reason I look at it, I know a lot of people think differently, and they say, "Oh, the Farm Bureau is against it." Actually, the local farm bureaus here in Snyder and Union counties, I've had many discussions with the farmers. And they're okay with reducing it. And the thing you got to look at is Centers for Rural Pennsylvania, which is run Senator Gene Yaw is the chair of that committee. And what they did some analysis on population, and 73% of the population lives in 19 counties. So the other 48 counties is the other 27%. So whether there's 203 of us or 153, it's still a 73-27 vote ratio. And I think you get a lot more done if you have fewer of us, because one, you can get to know the people a little bit better and have a better relationship. But also, it just is to me, you don't have people so far on either end. And what I mean by that is, everybody says, well, you're going to lose rural representation. No, because it's population divided by number of reps. So the people that represent urban areas, they're going to expand. So the ones on the edge of the cities will go out and get more rural constituents. And I think you have a more balanced body, quite frankly. And, I use the analogy, that if you have a board of directors that has 6 people in it, you can generally get things done and move things along. Not that there's not thoughtful and everything else, it has to be. But put 30 people in a room and try to get that consensus and move things forward. So I just think that a more manageable body from the members itself, we would benefit from that in Pennsylvania. And going to 153 would increase about 25% the number of people we represent. It's currently around 62 or 63,000 people. And, take another 15 or 16,000 people, that puts it up at 80,000 for a district. Union and Snyder counties have, between the two of them, probably about 85,000 people. So I don't think it's unmanageable. Farmers have had to do more with less. They've embraced technology. It's time that state government embrace technology too, and we use that to be more effective in how we do our jobs.
That's real interesting to us and to you, and to maybe some of our people watching today, but I suspect that's not what you're hearing when you're out and about on the campaign trail. So what is the number one thing you're hearing about it? Our surveys say still, even though things seem to be going along pretty well, jobs in the economy. Is that still number one that you hear?
Well, I hear that a lot. I hear the government, too much government regulation, also the opioid crisis, you know, what we're doing with that. But, you know, you hear jobs in the economy, and I talk a lot about that because without a healthy economy and good paying jobs, we don't have funds to run state government. So I think it's paramount that we make sure that in Pennsylvania and in the valley here that we have a good jobs market. And also the other thing I'd go behind that and say is, you know, workforce development, you know, training, education, so that we have people that are qualified. And we got a lot of people. It's just they might need, you know, I know that the community colleges discussions about that happening. So I think we need to look at what we have in the valley to make sure that we're ready for the jobs that we see coming. And you know, you look at I use a lot of data, and I don't go to websites that are run by an organization. You know, I won't quote the Commonwealth Foundation. I won't quote the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center. I go to basically government websites, and a lot of economic data you can get out of the Federal Reserve economic data. It's called Fred, and you can get on there and look at what they have. And you know, in our area, our unemployment is 3.6 and 3.7% in the counties, in Union and Snyder counties, and it's down quite a bit from, you know, when we had the Great Recession, and even in 2011 it was around 8% in Snyder County. So we're seeing jobs. We just need to make sure that we have an environment that continues to drive that economic engine.
Well, are you seeing better paying jobs coming? Because we do see a lot of help wanteds, but they're not family sustainable.
Well, I think all we have to do is look over to Ritz-Craft, where they're actually hiring, you know, 100. They've already hired close to 100 people, and are looking for another 100 and some. DCED was just over there. I think the Daily Item may have had a reporter at that. So yeah, we're seeing a lot of opportunities. You know, some of our manufacturers are hiring. So yeah, I would say that we're seeing our share of jobs that.
I know we've talked about this before, but refresh my memory where you stand on the minimum wage.
The minimum wage, and there's been a lot of discussions with that. Our minimum wage is currently tied to the federal minimum wage. In Pennsylvania, we do that. I think there's a lot of things to consider to where that wage is placed. And what I mean by that is when you look at your minimum wage, you know, some people have advocated for as high as $15 an hour. If you do that, there's going to be concerns about what about the people that are just above that minimum wage, and how does that impact them? Does that put them closer to a government program? Also, you need to keep in mind, if you're looking at more buying power, when you raise the minimum wage, that's not the only thing that increases for the employer to sustain paying those wages. It's also the Social Security tax, the workers' compensation insurance premiums that go with that, unemployment compensation factors that go into that. So I don't know how much buying power you give somebody when you raise the minimum wage once everything equals out. I do favor more of a competitive environment where we have more jobs. If we want to talk about raising the minimum wage, I'd want to know where people want to place it, number one. Number two is I would want to also look at maybe having a training wage for some people. You know, when you hire a new employee, that maybe you could have a training wage, or for maybe high school kids, because I know a lot of our school districts, and in fact my kids did when they were in high school, they worked at the high school as cleanup and painting and so forth. The school districts hire people, and we need to be careful because that will impact property taxes for the people in those districts, depending on where you place the wage.
Yeah, most of the surrounding states do have higher minimum wages, and I think they've done it mostly in gradual steps. I don't think it's been from a 7.25 to 15, more like a 8 or 9, then maybe a 10 or 11.
Yeah, and I'm open to having that discussion. I just think that we need to be very careful with that. And the other thing you need to be careful about too is when you see those jobs, and a lot of people that would make that might be kids that are in school. And I don't know if you're familiar with the minimum wage report that the Pennsylvania Department of Labor and Industry does every March. Mm-hmm. I actually read that, look at it, analyze it, and see where the wage earners are that are earning minimum wage. And maybe if we take some of those things, because I know the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industries in that committee, as well as people from the Department of Labor. So again, I'm not opposed to taking a look at it. I just think we need to proceed cautiously and not just be throwing a number out there of $12 or $15.
I believe the governor has advocated for raising raising minimum wage by 2020.
Yeah, it was, and there's been a couple since the governor's gotten elected where he's just stated a number and says this is where it should be. You know, if you look at what the market bears and where things are, you know, does it need to be updated? You know, maybe you put it somewhere around $8.50 or $9 an hour. You know, you can sort of look at that and see where things go. The other thing that happens with that also is as you look at that, and if it's increasing wages for high school kids, you got to be careful what it does to the statewide average weekly wage, because a lot of contracts for public sector unions go off of the statewide average weekly wage. So we might have to, you know, make sure we're mindful of all these things that might play in to the ramifications of just where we place that number. So I'm willing to have the discussion.
Okay. One thing that did happen this year in the legislature is the passage of the rule to keep the guns away from people with protection from abuse orders and what have you. And you were in favor of that?
Well, actually, I worked with a group of individuals, and I think I use this as an example when we were talking up in Lewisburg at the debate. You know, yes, I actually attended a few press conferences with Representative Quinn from Bucks County, and Marguerite had the bill, and I know there were some struggles in getting that done. And I was the rep from the rural areas that actually supported it. I was the only one at both press conferences that wasn't from the Southeast. But I looked at it and I looked at what it did. It didn't actually deal with our laws for firearms. It dealt with our laws for protection from abuse, which are two separate. You know, they're intertwined. But what I said and what the moms demand action. Actually, one of the ladies from Lewisburg said, "Fred, I really like the way you put that." And it is the fact that every right we have comes with a responsibility. And the fact that when somebody has displayed that they are not responsible, then we have to take a look at what we do to keep other people safe with the rights that they have. And this is not for a temporary PFA. This is for a final PFA where somebody has been before a judge more than one time. It also does give some things on the back end for people that may have had their firearms taken from them. If you have a roommate and your roommate has a PFA and they come and take your guns under law prior to that, there was no mechanism for that person to get their guns back prescribed in law. But this actually put a pathway in law for them to do that. And also at the expiration of the order for the person who had their firearms taken for them to get their firearms back. So I think it was a reasonable piece of legislation, and that's why I worked very hard to make sure we could get the bills, the numbers to pass that. That's why it took so many days.
What did your constituents feel about that?
I think everybody realizes that. And the biggest thing that I see with the people of Union and Snyder counties is they are very, very smart. They're hardworking, and they're reasonable. And I think that they would agree with the assessment of that.
Well, one piece of legislation that did die or it's stuck in the legislature is keeping guns away from people with mental illness. How do you feel about that?
Well, I know there's some things there, and again, if there's an issue about public safety, it's the responsibility of state government to take care of that. We already have our criminal background checks that the state police do, and I don't know if you've looked at what the state police does for criminal background checks. They actually do check mental health records on the PICS and NICS systems. So, you know, I think sometimes we're looking at that and saying, oh, we don't have these checks. I would encourage anybody that thinks we're not checking for people with mental illness to take a look at that state police report and see all the things that they do check for.
Or should we keep guns away from those people?
Well, again, I think we shouldn't have guns with anybody that can't handle the right. But I don't know at this point in time right now that we need to expand that. I think we need to take a look at what we're doing and how it's working.
You mentioned drugs and opioids and heroin earlier. What is? It feels like, in fact, Joanne Troutman from the United Way, who meets with us as part of our community advisory board, said to me the other day that she felt like it was kind of stalled, that we weren't making the progress we needed to be making. What do you see anything on the horizon that to further deal with this epidemic?
Well, I know we've already done some things around the opioid and prescription, particularly relating to prescriptions and treatment. One of the things we did was, education for doctors. We also did the prescription monitoring, so that, people couldn't doctor shop and go to different pharmacies or different doctors to get their prescriptions filled. We also did something for treatment, which allowed other facilities that had empty beds to use those empty beds for overflow for treatment facilities. So there are some things we've done. Looking forward, are there more things we can do? We always, as we learn more, there's always things we can work on and people we can get information from on how to best treat it. The thing I would say with that is we participate in the opioid task force in my office. We actually, when I can't be there, Ben from my office is always there. And we're looking at having some more of those discussions as time goes on. And I don't know if anybody's looked at what's been done for Centers from Rural PA, but I've been in many of their, participated in their roundtable discussions over the past couple of years, and that's where some of our legislation has come from. So are there more things that we can do? Yeah, we always need to be looking forward and seeing things that we can improve upon. But again, I just want to make sure that when we do it, we talk to the right people that have the knowledge and experience with dealing with out on the boots on the ground with that.
Fred, what are your thoughts on property tax reform?
There's a thing, changing who pays the bill is not reform. Okay, that's the first thing I would like to say on property tax. Secondly, you need to look at school districts and where they get their local revenue. The bulk of their local revenue comes from property tax and earned income tax. Here in the Valley, I represent 4 school districts, and that Midwest school district, Snyder County, has the 3rd highest earned income tax rate in the state to the school district. Number 4 is Selinsgrove. Number 5 is Mifflinburg, and tied for number 6 is Lewisburg. And we're not even talking about any relief for people on that end of the scale. So what would happen is, if we just do this across the board, there are about 60 school districts that have no earned income tax, and most of them have 0.5%. Some of them, I think Shikellamy still has that old occupational assessment as part of what how they get their revenue. But what would happen is, if we just went for House Bill 76 and said, let's raise the personal income tax, let's raise the sales tax, that would fall down more on the people that are already paying a burden on the earned income tax. And our money would not stay here in the Valley, but rather go to Harrisburg to be redistributed around the state under the proposals they've put out there. I'm not, and I've had this discussion with Senator Wagner and Jeff Bartos. I said, guys, until everybody's paying 1.8%, that's the first thing you need to start with, because I'm not going to vote to have my money, the people I represent as constituents, have their money be taken to Harrisburg and redistributed to other parts of the state. I did a little bit of analysis with that. I went to the county courthouse in Snyder County and got the median assessed value of a home in the Midwest school district and multiplied it times the millage rate. And on that home, they'd pay about $1,425 or between $1,425 and $1,430 a year in property tax. If both husband and wife worked and they paid, there's a bill out there now to raise the personal income tax at the state level 1.72 points. If that were enacted, they would pay $1,490 more to state government, which means they'd be paying about $60 more than they're paying now. If I were to support those plans, I don't think I would be representing the people that elected me to represent them. I'd be representing parts of the state that aren't generating their local revenue. There's things I believe. I believe that the best tax is one my constituents don't have to pay. But we all know we have to pay taxes and fund our government. The next best tax is the one that's collected closest to the taxpayer, because there's the most accountability for that. So I never made a promise to anybody to collect more taxes in Harrisburg to redistribute around the state. So I'm not pushing property tax relief. That's not one of my platform ideas.
Bill?
This week the figures came out for gambling returns. We're down about 4.4% on table gaming throughout the state, and Pennsylvania's really staked a lot into gambling. Are we staking too much of our budget on gambling, and are we just pushing it too much to carry so many things across the Commonwealth?
Yeah, you got to look at the policy that goes into that, and gambling should not be a method for which any kind of sin tax shouldn't be a method for which we count on balancing our budget. You get to the point to where there's market saturation, and you get more and more people gambling and playing games of chance. There's only so many dollars to spread around. But we need to focus on things when we're looking at balancing our budget that grows our economy. You know, everybody talks about recurring revenue. Well, what creates recurring revenue is jobs and a healthy economy. So, yeah, I'm not a big proponent of balancing a budget on gaming.
You talk about sin tax. Gets to my mind the privatization of the state liquor situation. We've gotten a lot further along the road with that. Grocery stores selling wine and beer and what have you. Is there going to be a step that just goes beyond that and turns it into a private enterprise?
You're talking both wholesale, retail,
Yeah.
For all kind of wine and spirits. I think that would be a heavy lift, quite frankly.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see that happening anytime in the near future. Even if that were to be done, the LCB would not cease to exist because that's enforcement. My own personal belief on that is that, you know, in a free market, the government shouldn't be selling goods and services. The government should be regulating that and making sure everybody's playing by the rules. And I think that when you're doing on both sides of the table, there tends to be a conflict. The one thing I'll say is before we did some of the expansion of Sunday sales of wine and spirits, mm-hmm. there was a provision in the law that allowed 25% of the state stores to be open on Sundays. In fact, we were at about 29%, so the LCB wasn't even following that when they had some of the stores open. Now, take it and be your private tavern owner that serves a drink past, the time of the last call, and guess what? They're going to get fined, the LCB. So that's why I say that the state government should be in the method of enforcing the laws and the regulations and not be participating in the distribution of things that fall under those laws.
We had a front page story in the Daily Item on Wednesday, the 17th of October, looking at possible changes in penalties for possessing small amounts of marijuana.
Yes.
And I believe the House has actually been through this already. And there's a sense that a small, less than 30 grams, I think, would become more like a parking ticket or something like that. And that's something that you support or not?
Well, again, I'm going to look at it. I'm not for legalizing recreational use of marijuana. I just want to make sure that I'm clear.
And you did vote for the medical marijuana.
The medical marijuana I did, and I have a different reason for that. And that one comes back to a little bit of personal experience. If you have a family member or a child that you've tried everything else with, and it hasn't worked, because the biggest thing we heard is, well, this isn't proven. We don't have the test because the federal government hasn't taken off a Class 1 drug, so we don't have the data to do that. However, if you're a parent or a family member that's tried everything else, if you have the hope that it will work, guess what? You're going to try it. And I think that we needed to do that because I didn't want anybody that lives in Pennsylvania to have to break the law to try and help their family member that was suffering from an illness. So that's I supported that, and for that reason, I mean, I know when my son was young, he had an accident, and he was in the hospital for an extended period of time. He was on a ventilator for 26 days. And I know when they wanted to change him onto one ventilator, we said, will it work? And they said, we don't know, but what we're trying isn't working now. Now, I know it's a different application, but the similar principle. You've tried everything else. So, let's give those family members.
So then let's get back to either A, reducing the penalties for possessing marijuana, or legalizing recreational, which you say you're not.
I could get to a middle ground where you say you could you could change the penalties for it. I mean, we changed the penalties for things more than once. If we need to look at that and look at what does the penalty fit the crime, let's take a look and see what that is.
Okay.
I wouldn't be opposed to looking at it. I know we did a thing just recently in the past day or two that dealt with driver's licenses and people being able to get their driver's licenses back based upon certain I would say drug offenses.
Bill 163. Yeah. Rick?
Big issue around here is transportation. Fred, how do you convince lawmakers in Harrisburg, including those from Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, that transportation issues are important here
Well, I think, understanding transportation, and I got a lot of friends from Philadelphia that I've made friends in the legislature, Stephen Kinsey and, Martina White, Jordan Harris, just to name a few, that, they understand public transportation because their population is dense enough to handle that. Where we have problems is, our population is more spread out.
Sure.
I know there is the local transportation task force that's looking at the fixed route for the bus route to run from Williamsport to Geisinger to Sunbury to through the valley here. We need to do that. We also need to look at how we encourage businesses to participate in that. And I think I would look at some kind of maybe tax credit or something for a business that would invest in that to help get their employees around to work and so on. I think that people understand transportation. It's just a matter of how we come up with the method to fund it and get it started. And I think some of that happens probably through some incentives to get businesses to want to do that. Part of it is too our own personal habits. I see a lot of people that go to work every day, and I drive. Driving down to Harrisburg, you look into vehicles, and there's one person in each vehicle. And you see that around at work time a lot of places, and some of it starts with us, and we need to look at it and say, hey, are we willing to start carpooling and doing some things? I think we as a society have come to the fact that we like our independence, and we like not to have that fixed. I have to be on the bus at this time, or I have to ride with this person at that time. I remember when my mom worked at the Selinsgrove Center, she rode it from Sunbury to Selinsgrove with 3 other people, because that's what you did in that time. And so I think a little bit of it maybe is some. Getting used to that as a society again, that maybe we need to do more of that to help support that public transportation, but also give it incentives to businesses in the form of maybe some kind of tax credit or something if they invest in a transportation.
But in the end, you'll have to have cooperation from those folks.
Absolutely. And I think we can get there. I mean, we already do get cooperation from them. I mean, I know people maybe don't look at the Rabbit Transit, what used to be used over in Union and Snyder counties. That's public transportation. We get public transit dollars from PennDOT for that. So, I mean, like I said, I don't know that people look at it that way, but do we need to expand on a program like that? I think those are things that we all are looking at and should be looking at.
One of the things that fell off the plate in recent months is the idea of some sort of so-called Me Too bill coming out of the House. I guess State Representative Rob Kaufman dropped his support for a bill, saying I guess he was concerned about Leanne Kruger-Baranke's politicizing of the issue. Nonetheless, there's something just flat out wrong. It would seem to me about state tax dollars ever being used to pay off the debt of someone who has a judgment against them in a case like that.
I couldn't agree with you more. First off, it's terrible when people treat another individual poorly. I first want to say that I don't do that. Never have, and I just it's unfortunate that we didn't get more done with that, because I would have seen. Let's take the politics out of it. We're all human beings, and let's put that first. And I know they were talking about having some more hearings on it. Which, okay, if we're going to do it, let's do it. Get off the dime, get it done, and make sure that nobody's treated poorly. And quite frankly, that we're not using government money to pay hush money, which has happened in many areas of, at least in some areas of state government. Yeah. And I've heard of some of the ones that it has happened with, and is
there an appetite to get that done, do you think?
I think so. There certainly is from me and some of my colleagues, yes.
I shouldn't say Senator Wagner. He's no longer a senator, right? So Scott Wagner, I asked him what he wanted to be called. He said, just call me Scott. So, okay. He talks a lot about starting from scratch, zero-based budgeting and whatnot. And it's really sort of a misnomer, because you have obligations that are not going anywhere, and you don't really get to start from zero. But I don't know I've ever talked to a legislator who seems to pay more attention to the numbers than you do. He says that he thinks he can reduce the tax increase that's talked about with House Bill 76 just by cutting some expenses or raising some other revenues. Is there money to be found there?
Okay.
We've talked about waste.
There's a lot in that question, Dennis. First off,
We've got time.
the general fund or the state budget is a little over $84 billion. Okay, federal funds, liquid fuel, some other things. The general fund budget is about a little over 32 billion, between 32 and 33 billion dollars. So that's really our discretionary spending. And if you look at what we would need if we eliminated all property tax, okay, and I'm saying that for a reason, because if you don't eliminate it on businesses and only on homes, you'd need fewer dollars. But if you eliminate all property tax, it'd be about $16 billion for school property tax. Not all, we're only talking school property tax. So for some reason, people don't have a problem collecting revenue based on value of property for your municipal government and your county government just for school districts. So it would take $16 billion. I don't know that there's any way you can cut enough out of a $32 billion budget to fill that hole. Now, you would need fewer dollars if it were just residential property. You're probably in I know what it would raise the PIT to 1.72 points. That's Rosemary Brown's bill, which would be a huge tax increase on small business. Because I've heard it, and I've heard people repeat this, because they're going to these websites like the Budget Policy Center where they put a thing out there and say 74% of the businesses in Pennsylvania don't pay corporate taxes. That's true, because they're not organized as C Corps. They're subchapter S corporations, they're LLCs, they're partnerships, they're sole proprietorships. And that tax is paid at the personal income tax rate of 3.07 because the money flows through to the principals in the business. So if you have a plumbing business or you have a family farm, it might be an LLC, and if you raise that, you're raising those taxes on that family farm. I don't know that you're going to cut enough waste to get rid of school property tax. Again, the first thing I said you need to do is have everybody raise their earned income tax to 1.8 just to make it equitable for the people that live in Union and Snyder counties. The other thing is you have to control the growth rate of spending. Because if you just change who pays the bill and the spending continues to grow, you're just going to continue to raise those taxes. So again, if we're looking at good public policy, let's look at the whole thing and not just something that sounds good so I can go out on a campaign trail and promise somebody something that quite frankly is very, very difficult to deliver. I mean, we thought it was going to happen with the gaming, with the slot machines. And I think that there's people back then that knew it wasn't going to happen but just wanted gambling. Again, I'm not trying to question motive, but if you look at the numbers, and Dennis, you mentioned it, when we sit down and talk, there's one thing I do, I dig into the numbers because that's it. And it's important to look at the numbers from a state or a government independent agency, not from anybody that's being funded by someone else, because I always say follow the money and you'll find out what the agenda is. And that's why when I cite sources, I like to go back to the government websites, either the federal government with the economic data or the state government with the budget data and so forth. So I just don't see us, getting enough out of the government to eliminate property taxes. You're looking at a tax increase, a tax shift, quite frankly, somewhere else. And raising it on personal income is a huge tax increase on the majority of businesses operating in the Commonwealth, which gives them fewer dollars to reinvest in their business and hire employees. So I would, and if you don't mind, if I just go on some things I think state government can do to help those small businesses is update our fiscal code, or our tax code, our tax code, in looking at like-kind exchanges. When a person or a company doing business exchanges property for like property of another kind, sort of mirroring the federal government, so that they don't have to pay tax on a kind of, they can realize the gain without it paying tax on it till they get rid of it finally. Or they don't. If they have a loss, they can write that loss off if it's used for a business purpose or investment or however it was used previously. So like-kind exchanges is one. The other is the net operating loss, being able to, you got a small person, and the person has a small business and they're trying to make a go of it, and they have a loss, and being able to take that loss against some other income would be helpful to them. I mean, having been a small business owner, we did residential construction, and when the home was being delivered, we had to come up with the cash to make sure it was there. There are points in time when you had a second mortgage on your house or your line of credit, and that's what you took and used to make sure you paid for the house to help the cash flow. I think we need to help these businesses with cash flow right up front. And the other is the depreciation, the bonus depreciation, making that mirror the federal government. Currently, it's $25,000 for a small business in Pennsylvania when they buy a piece of equipment. The federal government, with the new tax law, changed that to $1 million, and then a phase down if the equipment was over $2.5 million. So I think we could do some things there that would definitely help small businesses, their cash flow, and help our job creators.
Your opponent is in favor of fully funded college tuition. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think we just sort of talked a little bit about the state of the Commonwealth and our budget, our finances. I mean, there's a lot of things that would be nice to be able to provide people, but somebody's going to pay the bill. We have property tax that people want to get rid of, and we have fully funded college. I think we ought to probably look more at making sure that we control the growth rate of the college tuition and provide mechanisms. I mean, we already have the 529 plan, but we also did a thing where when a kid's born, to incentivize that, they could put $100. They get $100 into account to incentivize a startup. But I think controlling the cost of the growth would probably be the first thing to start with. Because just paying for it doesn't make it affordable for us as a whole. So I would say that while education is extremely important, I think that the person that's getting the education probably should have some responsibility for paying for that, because they will probably pay more attention to it if they know that there's they're responsible for paying for some of that. Likewise, I think the biggest thing is in some of our colleges, our state-run universities, professors are teaching 12 hours a week. Let's look at some of those things, and let's drive down some of the costs so it's more affordable.
Was there a report out yesterday?
Yeah, that's what I was just going to ask. It's down about 4% in the state system enrollment.
I think Mansfield and Westchester were the only two that saw increases.
Even Bloomsburg, which is you consider around here a growing university, is down about 4 or 5%. You have Cheney down about 40%. Legislatively or as a body, what are you monitoring down there? What can be done to sort of stabilize that program?
Well, it's they've got a new chancellor, because that's changed a couple times in the past few years, and I think again it's a matter of what are we offering, what's our cost and our value for it. That's part of it. And this trend didn't just start a couple of years ago, and that's one thing I asked the chancellor. I think it was 2 years ago at the Appropriations Committee. Well, when did we know this was happening? And he cited they saw this coming for a lot of years, and I said, and you're waiting till now to develop a plan. That's some of the stuff I think that Senator Wagner is talking about when we talk about a more effective, more efficient government, and some of the zero-based budgeting things he wants to do. You look at areas where you can put specific performance measures in place and make sure you're meeting those. That's one thing that I think is so important when we talk about any kind of enterprise. I'm not going to call government's not a business, but it's an enterprise. And when you're talking about any enterprises, what are your performance measures? And are you making sure that you're meeting those? And I think that's some of what we need to do with our state-run universities, with our Commonwealth in general. I took a little bit different approach in the appropriations hearings the last year or two. A lot of times, you get that cabinet official and they come in and they sit down in front of the Appropriations Committee, and the Republicans try to make their points and the Democrats try to make theirs. And here's this person that, quite frankly, is just trying to run the agency. And the policy stuff isn't for them to determine. That's determined between the General Assembly and the governor. So the questions I asked was, do you have a stated objective for your organization or for your department that everybody understands? And they tell me yes. I said, do you have specific goals and measurable things that you're working toward to make sure you're meeting that objective? Yes. Do you audit those things for the performance? Yes. I said, send me the results. I haven't gotten any yet. I think that's some of what the senator's talking about. Send me the results and we'll take a look at it, because maybe there's some agencies that could use some more money, and maybe there's some agencies that could use some fewer dollars, and that's really how we look at it. So I guess that's a long way around to saying there's things we can do at our state-run universities, but I would have to be there a little closer to that to say that. But first thing you do in improvement is start measuring. That's the first way to improve. Is you got to start measuring it.
Very early on in our conversation today, you mentioned community colleges. It seems to me that there could be an answer in a more robust community college operation, certainly in this part of the state, if not the whole state. Is that something that's on anybody's agenda?
Well, I think there's a meeting coming up, and there's going to be some people. I think Commissioner Kantz is going to be talking about. There's one. I think is tomorrow. There's a meeting for the community college. So I think every avenue should be looked at when we're looking at education and job training and so forth. The thing I would also encourage is to make sure that we've got a lot of great resources here in the valley. We got Sun Tech, we've got Triangle Tech, we've got McCann, we have the place down here in Sunbury, the Lackawanna, Lackawanna Community College. So you have those. Let's make sure we're maximizing those resources also. So I don't think anything should be off the table when we're talking about our education and job readiness.
Okay, one last question. Your opponent is a physician. Is being in the legislature by definition a full-time job?
Well, I think if somebody doesn't want to make it a full-time job, there are people that do. And if you want to have the discussion, I don't think we should unilaterally in our district have somebody that's not going to put full attention to it, because there are people around the state that are. And if you don't, I think that our area would get the short end of the stick, quite frankly. I really appreciate the work that the people of Union and Snyder County have entrusted me to do over the last 8 years. I've taken it very seriously because it is the community where, I grew up here in Sunbury, but my wife, her family's always been from Selinsgrove, and I spent a lot of summers out in the western end of Union County, raised my family here, and it's just a great community. I recognize how hard the people work because I worked alongside them in a factory. That's where I started my career, was Conestoga. I worked alongside the people in the factory, raised my family in the community, was very active. And if this poor guy that grew up here in Sunbury can get a job, be successful, have his own business, and get elected to the State House, it makes it seem possible for everybody else that gets up and goes to work. And I think it sets the example that our government starts with everybody that wakes up in the morning or in the afternoon if they work night shift or afternoon shift, but gets up and goes to work every day. And that's really what makes our Commonwealth good and our valley so special. So I think it is, any job is what you make it. And I think if you don't want to devote the full time to the people of the area, we will be shortchanged, because there are other representatives, 202 of them, that go there and do it full time. So.
Okay, we'll leave it right there. Thank you, Fred.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Appreciate it.